morning, good afternoon, good evening. Professor Wolfman Ncube, one of the acting president of one of the factions of Triple C, was in Cholocho a few days ago. And he addressed his followers. He was mourning about Zimbabwe's disputed elections, how it has led to poverty and the country's political and economic crisis. He reminded me so much of what happened when I was in high school. We used to have college ball. And one of the years, one of the guys who was the master of ceremony was an individual who liked to be on the stage. Part of the proceedings on college ball was that at one point there will be a draw where the winners will be the young ladies who would have been invited to the college ball, and they will be given hampers as presents. This was a lucky draw. It was not a beauty contest, and I emphasize that point. And yet, this guy, let's call him X, he wanted it to be a beauty contest. So he had been rehearsing what to say as each of the three winners came up to collect their prize. This was at the time of the the Miss Universe beauty contest, and they had copied the proceedings to include the playing of Stevie Wonder's Isn't She Lovely tune. And I remind the listener again that this was not a beauty contest. And yet, he wanted it to appear as if it was a beauty contest. So we ended up with a situation where, as each of the three winners walked up stage to collect their prize, they were greeted with this song, Isn't She Lovely? And this guy praising their beauty, their beautiful eyes, their long, beautiful legs, etc., just as the master of ceremony at the Miss World would say. The unfortunate thing is, of course, that none of the three young ladies who won that day were particularly beautiful, particularly the one who won the top prize. And yet, X ignored all that. He continued to sing her praise. And that made it, of course, hilarious. I don't think the young ladies were flattered by it. Indeed, they were embarrassed by it. The moral of that story is you should not be going around saying the wrong thing just to flatter somebody. When it's so blatantly obvious that it is nothing more than flattery. I felt sorry for the girls, to be quite honest, because I think they were duly embarrassed by it all. It was not a beauty contest, so I pretend that it is. Professor Welshman Ncube was wittering about Zimbabwe's disputed elections. I think he was just shedding buckets of crocodile tears because the opposition, Professor Welshman Ncube and his fellow MDC Triple C leaders, know fully well that they are the ones who are the root cause of the disputed elections. They had the golden opportunity to implement the democratic reforms to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections. Notably, during the GNU of 2008 to 2013, they failed to implement even one token reform. So, what's this all about? They didn't implement even one token reform because Mugabe bribed them with the trappings of high office, and they forgot about the reforms. Professor Ncube himself was one of the ministers in that GNU. He knew the process of implementing reforms, and he knew they did not implement even one reform. So I find it ridiculous that he should be now bemoaning disputed elections when he knows that he and his friends had a chance to implement reforms to end that case, and they did not. Of all people, he knows it. Here is a quotation I've often used. This was said by his David Coulthard. In 2013, David Coulthard noted that the electoral process was so flawed, so illegal, that the only logical thing to do was to withdraw. But neither him nor Professor Welshman Ncube and the rest of the opposition leaders would withdraw because they also knew that if you participate, you will win a few gravy train seats. And so they participated to win those few gravy train seats. In other words, they participated out of greed. Worse than that, they've been conning their followers to participate in these flawed elections, knowing fully well that ZANU-PF was rigging, and knowing fully well that by participating, you give ZANU-PF legitimacy. And once they got in, they're quite happy. And yet, they always turn around and pretend and shed crocodile tears about the rigged elections, disputed elections. I find that totally unacceptable. Here is Margaret Longo talking about the same issue I'm talking about here, how the opposition have continued to participate in flawed elections out of greed.
Look at what happened to CCC, the Triple C party. Have a look. When they lost, when they said they were rigged, what I expected from them, I expected all parliamentarians to say, we are not going to go to participate in a rigged system. And we are not going to sit in a rigged parliament because the elections have been rigged. So all of us were not going to parliament. Imagine what could have happened. We could have gone into new elections. There's no way ZANU-PF was going to roll alone.
You think so?
Yes.
Do they care?
Caring or not caring, the public would have forced them because the majority of the people would want representation in parliament.
Of course, Margaret Longo is right. Indeed, as much as SADC in the AU condemned the 2023 elections, even after they have made it clear that those elections were flawed, Triple C guys went on to take up their gravy train seats. And not only that, as soon as they were in the infighting among the Triple C members themselves, leaders themselves, over those few gravy train seats ensued, ending up with the Triple C breaking up as we know it. It is therefore ridiculous that somebody like Professor Wolfman Ncube should continue to pretend as if he is not aware of what is happening here. Of course, he is aware of it. He is now on the campaign trail. He would want the people of Zimbabwe to participate in the 2028 elections without even one token reform implemented. No doubt he and his friends will be telling the people of Zimbabwe that they have devised vote rigging strategies to win rigged elections. Last year, Chamisa told the people that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. Of course, he was lying. And so the lying will continue. The most important thing here is Professor Wolfman Ncube and his fellow MDC Triple C leaders know fully well that without any meaningful reforms, the ZANU-PF will rig the elections. They will participate in those flawed elections for the sake of the few gravy train seats on offer. They'll fight over who gets those few gravy train seats. And then they'll turn around and start shedding buckets of crocodile tears over disputed elections. The real tragedy is the people of Zimbabwe have been naive and gullible enough to believe these lies. It is the people of Zimbabwe who are being cheated here. These so-called disputed elections, they are not disputed by Professor Welshman Ncube and his fellow MDC Triple C leaders. It is the ordinary people who end up disputing the elections, but only when the damage is done. I think the people of Zimbabwe must wake up to the reality that we cannot keep on participating in flawed elections to give ZANU-PF legitimacy, to reward MDC leaders with a few gravy train seats, and meanwhile perpetuate our own suffering. "2028 is around the corner. We need to make sure that we do not participate in those elections to perpetuate our own suffering. But of course, I'll be the first one to admit that that is easier said than done. Because there are millions of the Chamisa Chete Chete Brigade. They were conned into participating last year because they believed Chamisa had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. When you're talking about people who are that naive and that gullible, you know you're in trouble. Because it will not take much to convince the same people to participate again. This is the challenge for the people of Zimbabwe. Let's not be fooled by Professor Welshman Ncube and his fellow MDC Triple C leaders shedding buckets of crocodile tears about disputed elections when they have done nothing to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections. And worse still, when they have been participating in flawed elections to give ZANU-PF legitimacy for the sake of a few gravy train seats. They will always shed the crocodile tears to fool the ordinary Zimbabweans into believing that they care about disputed elections, about rigged elections. They don't care. We need to wise up. Thank you very much for those of you who were able to join me this afternoon. And have a good day.